So we were just talking about how the West treats the refugees that it helps create. Let's take a look at how Israel is treating or taking in Ukrainian refugees right now from the terrible situation that's unfolding. We have, again, remember, over 3 million Ukrainian refugees in just the past month alone. So this is a headline from the New York Times. It reads, Ukraine war ignites Israeli debate over purpose of a Jewish state. Most Ukrainians seeking refuge in Israel are non-Jews. Some Israelis see a moral imperative to take them in, but others see a threat to the country's Jewish character. So many of the refugees milling about the lobby of a Jerusalem hotel one recent morning had endured harrowing journeys from Ukraine, and in many cases were forced to leave close family members behind. Now, safely in Israel, they were picking up SIM cards issued by the Ministry of Immigration and Absorption and starting to contemplate next steps. By virtue of their being Jewish, having at least one Jewish parent or grandparent, or as in Miss Ivanova's case, having a Jewish spouse, they automatically qualified for Israeli citizenship upon landing at Ben Gurion Airport. So again, did you understand what they're saying? So again, if your spouse is Jewish, you have at least one Jewish grandparent. That's all it takes. As soon as you land in Ben Gurion Airport, you get Israeli citizenship. You automatically qualify for Israeli citizenship. Again, think about that. So Palestinians who are, 10 generations, they've been living in Palestine, they got no citizenship. And even if they did have Israeli citizenship, they'd be treated like second class. And again, you could be a dual national, so you could, be from Australia. And if you're Jewish, you land in Israel, you got 2 citizenships, you got 2 passports, you can go anywhere in the world, and the Palestinian can't leave, doesn't have one nationality. How is that fair? My cousin Roni has no nationality, like no official passport. So, the article continues, others were not as fortunate. Of the more than 15,200 Ukrainians who've arrived in Israel since the war began last month, nearly 11,000 do not meet the citizenship threshold. So that's the vast majority of them, right? Even though most have relatives or friends in Israel, they are considered refugees, not immigrants, and subject to stricter rules. The influx has ignited an emotional debate over what it means to be a Jewish state, pitting the national imperative to maintain Israel's Jewish character against Jewish values that demand caring for those in need. Exactly. Again, my understanding, my opinion of every religion, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, all these religions, they preach compassion, they teach compassion, they teach empathy, right? So without question, what should be the priority in this case, or if we're discussing any other religion? It's obviously taking care of those in need. That's what it is. That's why Islam and Christianity have roots in Judaism, right? They're not only monotheistic but Abrahamic religions. The 10 Commandments, these are things that resonate throughout. And the fact that there's a dispute in Israeli politics is interesting, right? So that's what's going on here. So some right-wing politicians and commentators have warned that the continued flow of non-Jews into the country could dilute its Jewish identity. Smotrich, a far-right lawmaker, warned that Israel's acceptance of refugees would, quote, flood the state of Israel with Gentiles. Wow, he doesn't mince words, does he? So more liberal politicians and religious leaders have cited the biblical mandate to love the stranger and the ethical lessons of a long history of Jews being refugees themselves. Exactly. You see, that's what it's about, man. That's what it's about. Nachman Shai, the left-wing minister of diaspora affairs, said the debate should focus on the values of the state of Israel because without them, this is not a Jewish state. Again, I don't agree with settler colonialism, but this is a correct point. What does Netanyahu, what does Bennett, what do the Israelis say about Israel? They say it's supposed to be the Jewish state, right? Now, of course, it's not right of them to claim to speak for all Jews because not all Jews are Israelis. But nevertheless, if it really is the Jewish state and Jewish values say to take care of the stranger, to help those in need, because that's what Judaism is, then why don't they care about that, the right-wing politicians? You see, it's hypocritical. So Speaking by phone from a train platform packed with refugees in Warsaw, he added, anything bearing the message that we are closing the door is terrible and against our Jewish and human values. Israel's right-wing Interior Minister, Ayelet Shaked, announced this month that Israel would take in up to 5,000 non-Jewish refugees on a temporary basis and would allow 20,000 Ukrainian non-Jews already in the country, most of them illegally, to stay until the end of the fighting. The images of the war in Ukraine and the suffering of its citizens shake one's soul and do not allow us to remain indifferent, she said. So just to jog your memory who Shaked is, as we just read, she's the Interior Minister. I was talking about this controversial law, which she's been pushing a few weeks ago on the channel here, which is basically that non-Jews cannot get Israeli citizenship by marrying an Israeli, right? So if you're a Palestinian and you marry an Israeli, you cannot have the citizenship. So that's the kind of person she is. That's her politics. But the strict quota, which was already close to being filled when she made the announcement, prompted public outrage and criticism from other government ministers. Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said Israel had a moral duty to take in more non-Jewish refugees. Quote, we won't close our gates and our hearts to those who lost everything, he said as he toured a border crossing between Ukraine and Romania. In Israel, there are 9 million residents, and our Jewish identity won't be harmed by a few more thousand refugees. So, Ms. Shaked, who was again the Interior Minister, later liberalized the guidelines because there was so much backlash. That's why she did it, saying that any Ukrainians with relatives living in Israel would be allowed in temporarily and would not count towards the quota of 5,000. That policy, too, has been criticized as too restrictive because it penalized refugees without families in Israel. Yeah, I mean, of course it's restrictive. Why do you assume that, again, we said there are 3 million Ukrainian refugees. Obviously, not every one of them is going to have family in Israel. Like, that's so random. That's very narrow. And the criteria for being a refugee is you're fleeing a war zone. It's not whether you have family in a country. I don't understand. In any case, Israel has walked a fine line during the war, trying to aid Ukraine without alienating Russia, whose cooperation it needs to operate against Iranian forces in Syria. Israel has deep connections to both countries, and Bennett has served as a mediator. Again, that's true. Many Israelis are actually Ukrainian Jews or Russian Jews, not only, but certainly a good chunk. Correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't Netanyahu someone on his mother's side or father's side from Ukraine or Poland? I don't remember. But the point is, you have a lot of Eastern European Jews who are Israelis. And it's absolutely correct. Israel is trying to walk. Israel is actually in a really tight spot with this politically because they don't want to upset the Russians and don't want to upset the Ukrainians. It's interesting. It's interesting. Jews have a complicated history with Ukraine. Once home to a large, thriving Jewish population, Ukraine was the scene of widespread pogroms in the early 1900s and some of the worst mass killings of the Holocaust during World War II, often carried out with the help of Ukrainian auxiliaries. Exactly. And this is what's so outrageous when Zelensky was speaking to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and he says that during World War II, Ukraine treated the Jews well. I'm paraphrasing. I mean, hold on a second. That's not what happened, man. Like, as the article says, they killed Jews and Poles. Like Bandera, this Nazi that they look up to, the Azov battalion, and and others. They gave him the hero of Ukraine. Even that guy participated in the Holocaust. They were killing Jews. They were killing Poles. They massacred them. How can you speak to Israelis about the Holocaust and then act like that didn't happen? This is astonishing to me. No, I mean, anyone would be angry at that. I'm angry at that. It's just ridiculous. Like, he's if someone else said that, you would be accused of revisionism because, it's kind of what it is. You can't act like Jews weren't being killed in Ukraine. They were being killed. That's a historical fact. There was a Holocaust there. In Europe, and Ukraine was involved in that. A lot of Jews died. A lot of Poles died. So I'm stunned how he speaks to the Knesset and like acts like it didn't happen. I don't know. It's stunning, really. This is a good line. But to others, the lesson of the Holocaust is the need for a Jewish homeland, and for that reason, some right-wing activists have objected to Israel taking in any more than a symbolic number of non-Jewish refugees, even on a temporary basis. It's a revealing line, I should say, because, you know, they're basically saying that it's apartheid, right? That's again, they're kind of saying the quiet part out loud. And then the next line, they say, we know that in Israel, what is temporary becomes permanent. Uprooting them will be even harder. My goodness. I mean, they're not mincing words, are they? And here they talk about the Jewish religious law. So, you know, even if you get Israeli citizenship, if you're not Jewish, you can't get married. You know, it's quite strict. So, in any case, I think the fact that the Israelis are, even with Ukrainians, right? Like, it's you would think that because many Israelis are Ukrainian Jews originally themselves, their parents or grandparents, you would think that they would be more like they would have a bigger open door policy for Ukrainians. But even with the refugee policy, they're just openly saying, we want Jews and the non-Jews can stay a little bit. Do you know, let me explain to you guys why I read this article to you. Israel's politics is about legitimizing the occupation, right? Israel wants Jews to stay in the occupied territories so they can legitimize the existence of Israel on top of Palestine. That's why they wanted the Jews from Syria to go to Israel. They wanted the Jews from Iraq, from Egypt, from everywhere. And that's why they are saying that the people who come from Ukraine as refugees, they're refugees. If they're Jewish, they get citizenship because they want them to stay there. So this is how they legitimize the occupation, because then they say, you know, you would say, like, where do you expect everyone to go? This is a Jewish state. Yeah, but they you know, this is ethnic cleansing. When you forcibly remove a population, the Syrians, the Palestinians, the Lebanese, and then bring in your population to take, the land, that's ethnic cleansing. That's why in Sheikh Jarrah, it's been called ethnic cleansing, because you're kicking out Palestinians from their homes and giving them to Jews who are not even from there. Like one of those guys, Jacob, his name is, from the US. So an American guy comes to Palestine and kicks a Palestinian family out of their home. I mean, like, how is that not apartheid? How is that not ethnic cleansing? That's just one example. That's one house, one household. And so on a mass scale, the Golan Heights, the Syrian Golan Heights, which have been occupied by the Israelis since 1967, Bennett, just in December 2021, he said that he wants to expand the number of settlements there, okay? So look at what he said. This is from El Monitor. The headline reads, Bennett outlines plan to settle more Israelis in Golan Heights. This is ethnic cleansing, because the Golan Heights are Syrian. You cannot bring in your population to settle them there so you can legitimize your occupation. The Golan Heights are recognized by the United Nations as Syrian. Every single country on earth recognizes that they belong to Syria and that Israel must leave. It's only until Donald Trump did the Israeli lobby lots of favors. He killed General Soleimani for them, and he did the Abraham Accords to normalize ties with the Bahrainis and the Emiratis. And he also recognized Syria's Golan Heights as Israeli, which is so ridiculous. Like, who the hell is Trump or the United States to recognize Syria's Golan Heights as someone else's? It's Syria's. It's not yours to recognize or not recognize. Screw you. So my point is that there's not even any debate about this. And by the way, the Biden administration, do you think they walked that back? Of course not. Blinken was even asked about it, and he's like, no, we were just going to continue recognizing it as Israeli. They're such colonizers. What's the difference between Trump and Biden, and, you know, between those two and colonizers from 100 years ago who are just carving up a map and saying, this is yours and I'll take this one. No difference whatsoever. So my point is that in the Golan Heights, they're keeping that, preventing Syrians from having their land back and their resources, and then trying to expand the number of settlements here, trying to double it, right? Which is illegal under international law, and not just because the Syrian Golan Heights belong to Syria, but because it's ethnic cleansing. And then, of course, the same thing when they're trying to legitimize the occupation, and this is one of the ways they do that. And this is important to understand, because, again, man, like don't get me wrong, I like the idea of, you know, a Jewish country. I think it's great, but not when you do it at the expense of Palestinians. You know, for anything, it's the same thing. Like, you know, a Muslim country, Christian country, great. But you can't do that at the expense of others. It's not fair. It's unjust.